Welcome everyone. I'm delighted to welcome you all, those of you who are joining in person to CBRL Amman Institute. I think everyone here I recognize most people here, so welcome back. And of course, we're delighted to welcome everyone who's joining us in the Zoom room this evening. You're joining us at the end of day one of a 3-day workshop that we're running for a scheme funded by the British Academy titled Bridging Research to Publication, Advanced Writing for Jordanian Early Career Academics. So we've had a really fabulous day, joined by 13 Jordanian early career researchers for the first day of this workshop. We're running the workshop in collaboration with RIFS, which is Jordan's Royal Institute for Interfaith Studies. And RIFS director, Dr. Renee Hatta, is with us running things. And the idea with this workshop is that over the next year or so, all of the participants will have been, through mentoring and various workshop activities, coached and assisted to be able to submit their research into one of our peer-reviewed journals. And we're also joined in Amman this week by our journal editor-in-chiefs. So we're having a great time. And this afternoon, we were joined by a very special speaker who will be introduced by Dr. Renee shortly. Dr. Wafa gave a really interesting presentation for our workshop participants on rethinking research and representation in education. It was incredibly inspiring and thought-provoking. It kicked off an awful lot of discussion, and I'm sure that over the next hour we'll be equally enthused by what is said. So before I hand over to Dr. Renee to do the introductions, just to remind those of you on Zoom that we have a Q&A box. So if you have any questions, please feel free to write those in the Q&A box, and we will try to get to as many of those as we can at the end of the talk. So I will now hand over to Dr. Renee to introduce our speaker.
Good evening, everyone with us here at the CBRL and also online. I'm delighted to present Dr. Wafa Alkhadra. Dr. Wafa is a full professor at the American University of Madaba here in Jordan. And we were thrilled, as Jane said, to listen to her theory on Ishra and her research, especially in Jordan throughout the governorates, about women and the role of Jordanian women, and how she introduced her own theory into academia, of which we are very, very proud. So tonight she's going to speak to us about from observation to coexistence, pathways to indigenous knowledge and research activism. I'm so happy that she's with us, and I know it's been a long day, but we're thrilled to have her. So please welcome Dr. Wafa and join me in welcoming her as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Can you hear me well? Yeah, good evening, and thank you very much for being with us for today. And it's a great pleasure just to get this opportunity to share with you some interesting outcomes of a study that I conducted a few years back. And I'm sure it requires many more studies and paper for it to emerge and evolve into being a theory. And hopefully we're gonna get there one day. And thank you for having me over here to this center, and always all the best with your future endeavor. So I'm gonna start with the conceptual framework for this study. When, I worked on this concept, the Barefoot Nisswiyya, for more than 20 years. But I always struggled with the conceptual framework because I wanted to know how to conceptually frame the idea and the concept within the whole spectrum and continuum of theories on women's rights. And the struggle came from many nuances and probably some epistemic limitations sometimes with how to conceptualize from our part of the world. As an academic, just coming from the Department of English Language, as we know, we always had this feeling of the, and I used that earlier, epistemicide. So whatever you have of an epistemology and a theory, it will die before it evolves into the normative epistemology that exists in the world. So the struggle was there. And I've been long enough in this landscape of women's rights to see the different phases of women's rights and feminism in our part of the world. And when I decided to write it in 2021, I wrote it when I was angry with the concept of internationalization of women's rights. And of course, now we are witnessing this. We're seeing the double standard that comes with this internationalization of women's rights. We're not talking about what's happening to women in Gaza and Palestine under occupation, and we're silent. And this is why internationalization of women's rights to me was not only a struggle, but a hindrance to move forward in this pathway. Also, I was highly interested in Jad's idea of NGOization of women's rights and the democracy that comes with it. Because I've seen many activists in the Arab world, women's activists. The moment they decided to come up with an NGO, this is where I felt that they moved from their activism into, focusing, let's say 2/3 of their time on fundraising, on getting the donation, the funding that would help them sustain their work. So Jad was very articulate where she said that we moved from women's rights into NGOization of women's rights into the democracy of women's rights. So that was another area that left me with a lot of questions as well and inquiries. Another interesting theorist is Layla Abu-Lughod. And Layla Abu-Lughod came and said, do women in Afghanistan really need emancipation? And the article is highly important because this is where we're able to escape the trap we've always had, the trap where we looked at one another through colonial fantasies. And probably she helped us think about our standpoint as women in our part of the world, away from those colonial fantasies and stereotypes. So she was also another important theorist that helped me at least get into knowing how, just at least giving me the right benchmark on how to conceptually frame the paper. Another interesting also concept that came from theorists is the concept of pluriversalism. Universalism, again, proved to be, to get to a point where we started to see more of backlash than probably the impact we always pursued. So pluriversalism was another concept that helped in the conceptualization. Ecofeminism, And when I started to craft this concept, Barefoot Nisswiyya, I needed an immigration to nature, to the wilderness, and probably to experiment with the idea of sociography. The first time I heard about this concept is from Prince Hassan. We were having a meeting and he came up with the idea of sociography. And I said, I have to go and learn more about that. And this is where I learned about how physical landscaping and let's say geography, physical cartographies that surround us would shape our inner geography, the way we fire and wire our neurons. So whatever context you have outside, this context will be internalized and, you know, it turns into another internal geography. I needed nature because in nature, you have not only the wilderness, but enough experiences and exposure where you are able to practice reflection, self-examination, but not in the, you know, in the sense that we bring more torture, self-examination as part of discovery and recovery and the mindful reflection. So it had to be in nature. And this is why ecofeminism is part of this theory. Another interesting also theorist that helped me a lot to come up with this coinage of barefoot feminism is Max Neef. And he's the one who crafted the concept of barefoot economics. And he's someone, and I mentioned that in the earlier lecture, where he used to work with big corporates in the US. And he said, I helped the big corporates to become wealthy, healthy, and wise, and with more wealth. And I could not help my people in Chile to recover from poverty, and especially those under poverty line. And one time there was this conference in one of the 7-star hotels that brought many economists to talk about poverty in the world with their fancy suits sitting around the table trying to theorize and come up with some kind of interpretation about poverty. He said at the end of this trip, after the conference, they said, we have to go and meet people in some underserved communities. They went to one of the Chilean communities, and people there were very busy to survive the mud. They had some kind of mud flood, and they were very busy cleaning the area from that. And he said, I was so close to a group of people, and they are my people. And that was a moment where I felt that I can connect with them, but language failed me and I got lost. I couldn't connect with them. And it turned out that the reason why he couldn't connect, and according to him, is the fact that there were degrees of separation between him and them. And he decided to leave everything and go to Chile, live with them, and learn about that. And he was able to come up with a theory that helps many people who are poor to not only be enabled to be economically viable, but also to get into self-actualization. So he's someone that helped me a lot with the concept. This is why mine is Barefoot Nisswiyya. And of course, I use the positionality theory. And this is why at the very beginning of my study, I talk about 3 different positionalities. The positionality of the researcher, the positionality of the research, and positionality of the context, to lay bare all layers of, let's say, maybe privilege or bias on my behalf as a researcher, or some epistemic gaps that they existed. Ethnomethodology was taken into account. Phenomenology, because I talk about ontologies, beings, and in a way, the focus will be on organic ontologies, homegrown. This is why I use homegrown, grassroots, indigenous agents. And those, I needed some conceptual framework coming from phenomenology. And maybe participatory research methodology helped, especially with Ishra, but I took it a step further in that. So in a way, I created epistemic fusion coming from different areas, and those areas, either areas of inspiration for me or areas to answer some of the inquiries that I had regarding some controversial issues. And Barefoot Nisswiyya, let's say, was curated as a concept at the literal and metaphoric levels. The metaphoric one, with the barefoot, it doesn't mean that they are poor or hindered by poverty, but it means that they are so grounded in the experience, in the immediacy of the experience, in the everydayness of their everyday struggle to leverage whatever resources, in the absence of resources, in the midst of the deficit of resources. So barefoot, it means that there is no superfluous ornamental layer between the feet and the field and the ground. They are so groundedness. And the literal one is barefoot because they have basically no resources, and they were able to leverage natural resources in nature. Like Hind, she was able to leverage the banana leaves that are considered to be part of the waste coming from some farms. She was able to recycle that, leverage this natural resource to turn them into furniture pieces, beautiful furniture pieces. In Bilal, for example, through shearing of the wool, she was able, along with her family members and some community members, to come up with the best rugs, wool rugs, and some also furniture pieces that they are 100% wool, and they are not made in any place. They're made in Jordan, in the southern part of Jordan. And many other women who were able to leverage no resources whatsoever except the natural resources they have in their immediate communities and turn them into a source of empowerment for them, for their family members, and for the whole community. So this is as far as the concept itself is concerned. I needed, after that, I said, okay, Now, as for the conceptual framework, I was able to create the fusion of epistemologies, epistemic fusion. Number two, I was able to come up with the right concept of all the experiences I had over a period of 20 years. After that, I need to collect my data. So my data was, I said, what is missing here in Jordan when we talk about women's rights? What is missing here is many categories of women that have professions that are considered to be invisible, totally invisible. We don't see them, we don't see their profession, and we cannot evaluate and measure the impact they have in their communities. If I look at the women that they are Nisa al-Ard, Barefoot Nisswiyya, the impact they have in the community is huge, especially with the economic impact, the kind of development that you would have in these communities. But whenever we talk about the most important or the top 100 impactful women in the world, you would never see Bilal, Zahra, or Sakhir, and many others. They are invisible. They don't exist. And this is because of how women's rights in Jordan and in the region and maybe in the world evolved to be exclusive of these women, and we created social closure. The social closure is that we created a category of women shouldering the responsibilities of this category of rights in the absence of the grassroots women. And the social closure, I said, what is missing then is the space where we have the leadership modality or the agency modality of these women in these invisible professions. Bless you. And as a result of that, I said, then I need a research methodology to help me connect with these women, because I focused on the shepherdess, the farmers, factory workers, and janitors. And then I said, what is the best methodology for that? I thought of ethnography and the participatory research methodology as well. I said, if I create some kind of intertwined paradigm of both. But then the first 2 years, I felt that there are so many epistemic limitations, because you do have, at the end of the day, although in ethnography, you do have the participants of stakeholders and constituency being part of this research community, contributing to it and creating this mutually constitutive learning and data. I always felt that at the end of the day, the researcher is having an interpretive authority over it, even if they are immersed or indulged in the process of analysis and interpretation, especially in the participatory action research, where you have communities doing the SWOT analysis and coming up with an action plan based on recommendations, discussions, and future plans. Still, I had a lot of authority over them with my research methodology. And this is probably where I said, why not go back to my tradition and heritage and see if we have any research methodology that would help. So after coming up with Barefoot Nisswiyya, and in a way, the word Nisswiyya is something that is homegrown from my culture, I said, now I would have some kind of recovery from the dominance of the normative epistemology coming from the global north, at least. Now I have a concept. So maybe with the research methodology, we can also get somewhere. I went back to my tradition in Arabic literature and sociology, and I came across Ishra and al-Bawh. So Ishra is about communities creating connectivity and connectedness through care, mawadda wa ulfa wa rahma. Care, solidarity, and togetherness. And I said, I'm gonna use that. But what else do I need? I need al-Bawh. al-Bawh is disclosure. And the reason why I looked for al-Bawh, because if you build this connectivity, connectedness, you need language to obliterate all the degrees of separation between the researcher and those who are part of the research, the constituency. What kind of language do we need? And we know language is, especially for women, sometimes you feel that you have this linguistic displacement. Some would say that this is symbolic annihilation of women in language, because some languages are too masculinized, that the feminine pronoun or verbs, and sometimes they are masculinized. And I came up with a very interesting study, and this is why I was very keen on language, where I studied the language in school textbooks, saying, is language inclusive of women, like women and girls? And then when I looked at language, I found out from this study that when it comes to the subject, it's always masculinized. When it comes to the objects, it's always feminized. When it comes to the proper noun, it's always masculinized. When it comes to relational nouns, زي عمته خالته, it's always feminized. Personally speaking, I have no problem with that. But when you see that language is shaped, dominated by power relations, by hierarchical power dynamics, this is where you would say that language for some people, it will be a natural flow of language acquisition. For others, it will be a struggle. For example, I studied in this language something called subject-object articulation. That is, how is the subject, if it is a girl or a boy, is associated to an object in a textbook. So it turns out that when it comes to boys, you see the lab, association with the lab, with the pen, with the books, with the libraries, but when it comes to girls, it is associated with the garden and sometimes with very specific private spaces. Having said that, it doesn't mean that this should be problematized in a way where we end up having clear dichotomy between what is feminine and what is masculine. The public space should be masculinized, the private space should be feminized. This is, a space that is open to both, and a space that both should articulate their own agency and their own ontology. But the reason why I try to give an example about how language sometimes would be like some kind of symbolic annihilation of your identity as a girl, and would, in a way, defines the tool that I would use for my research. So the tool that I used is al-Bawh, and in our Arabic heritage, al-Bawh disclosure was used because this is where you externalize the authentic internal voice, and you externalize the inner voice in a way using a language that does not alienate you, but it brings you closer to language and people with you. This is why in Bawh, we use our own words and our own wording. Especially if you have women together or girls together, we end up having our own linguistic naming and titling and different linguistic tools. Because Bawh would help you come up with a language that is organic, that is, in a way, how can I put it? Articulatory rather than enunciatory. Enunciatory, this is where you enunciate. You struggle with words. Articulatory, this is where you have a flow of language. So Bawh was it. And for you to practice Bawh with women, you needed to work on Ishra and to create this mawadda rahmeh, the care, togetherness, solidarity, where you trust one another and then you create reciprocity based on empathy. And once you do that, you escape as an academic and a researcher. I am subject to practicing, let's say, academic kind of, and we do that every now. We get into the mistake of practicing academic superiority. I read the studies say, if you can see sometimes in social media, they would say, الدراسات تقول. So we are oriented towards studies, theories. But in fact, with the Barefoot Nisswiyya, I discovered that the data that I got from the Barefoot Nisswiyya, as invaluable as the data I got from theories and books, but those data or the information and literature I got from them are homegrown, are made by moments of suffering, moments of resilience, moments of steadfastness, moments of pain, but also moments of success and self-actualization. And they were so precious, the data and information I got. And that helped me to come up in my study with Bawh 1, 2, 3, 4, and I ended with the 5th Bawh, which is my Bawh. What happened to me when I moved from highly theoretical landscape of academia into praxis and practice in the field. And this bridging the gap or obliterating the compartmentalization between theory and praxis was really rewarding. Not easy, but was rewarding. And that was being able to see that the research is not always born inside your lab or your office, driven by books and theories. There are many theories, many concepts, many terminology, and valid data that would come from the field, from the ground. And there has been this bias and discrimination against the field. And this is why when we want to study economic empowerment of women in the rural area and the village, we end up in hotels, 5-star hotels, 4-star. Why? Why? With banquet of food that ends up in the trash. Why do we do that? It's because sometimes I feel we're scared from the field. We're scared to go and have this experiential knowledge that is just coming from new, innovative, creative tools articulated by these women. So I have many interesting stories that I would like to share with you regarding, this conceptual framework that I have, managed through epistemic fusion, and then the research methodology of Ishra and al-Bawh. So we started having, I said, this is the time for me to practice this. For me to practice it, it was very important that I set the ethical framework. I set it clear from the very beginning, where I talked to Barefoot Nisswiyya about the project, about the interest of this paper to look for new modality of agentic leadership coming from them, those leadership as exemplary of homegrown grassroots leadership. They were happy with that. And I said, I'm gonna use pseudonyms just to make sure that we protect your privacy, private life. So if I start off with Bilal. So Bilal was a shepherdess for like over 20 years of herding. I mentioned earlier that she was the GPS for all shepherds and shepherdesses in the area, because she's the one who would wake up early in the morning and tell them whether to go to the mountain or the valley or to different areas, villages in the area, to protect the herd from cold weather. Sometimes cold weather would harm the herd. And she was very keen to share that. She also shared, like, do you know the dummies of, I think that one day we need the dummies of herding, and she's the best one to come up with this book, because she taught young boys and girls on the alphabets of most effective herding in the area. And what is really interesting about her, she has such a strong personality and heavy smoker. And in a way, she's anything but maternal and anything but caring, because she likes to boss everyone around. This is her personality. So I remember that sometimes with the young boys and girls, they used to know how to get the best out of her. And it was by cracking jokes or by asking her to sing. And she has, her way of sharing beautiful songs from the heritage. So her communication with this young generation, because she was in her 60s, to me was very impressive that she was able to have this communication, although at times, if you look from, some kind of distance, you would say that she's bossy. But they managed to get the best out of her care and love by cracking jokes and singing with her. So she was the one who taught me a lot, everything about this. And just to give you an idea about how important it is to be sensitive on how you connect with them, because whether we like it or not, especially those, some people coming from academia, I am an example of that. Subconsciously, we are like our perspective, and this is why I use phenomenology in myself. Our perspective is, even if it is at the subconscious level, it is defined by colonial fantasies. We look at one another from those colonial fantasies. So, and they are sometimes they navigate inside us in a very subtle, indirect way. So now I'm going to share with you one of those anecdotes that in a way helped me to go through this self-learning and reflection and recovery as well from some of the biases that you have. I remember that at the very beginning when I was learning the details of herding, something that I noticed as also an animal activist, that imbilal can be tough with rams, المرياح الكبش أحيانا. And every time she has a piece of bread, this مرياح or the ram will attack her, poke her leg, and then steal the piece of bread. And in expression of her frustration and anger, and just to make sure that this does not get repeated, she used to stone him with a, pebble, not really a big stone. So at the very beginning, I always felt very grateful that she taught me a lot. And I said, this is my opportunity to give back. So I went to her and I told her, I took a course on how to use your voice to calm down animals. And it was a course I took on, like, do you know the dog whisperer? Yeah. So I took a course on that. It was meant to address your relationship with dogs, but ended up dealing with all animals. So I said, let me try this, and maybe this is my way of giving back to you. So I said, please, if you hold a piece of bread, and then let's see what will happen. So the ram saw the piece of bread, and he came all the way to attack her. So this is where I decided to come in between, and then I looked at him in the eye, and I started using the voice that I need to use. And this is where, after 3 minutes talking to him with this tone, he, in a way, the ram nodded and then turned and left. So I was so excited that at last, this is reciprocity, because in Ishra, I have steps for how to perform Ishra. And this is where you have reciprocity, learning reciprocity. So I looked at her and I said, you see, in Bilal, it's easy what you need to do. And then she looked at me and she said, I'm going to say that in Arabic. She said, من عقلك؟ من عقلك؟ وفاء. بقول لها شو من عقلي هيو؟ قالت لي هذا بس لأنك شجرة. That was a turning point. So she said, do you think that you were able to impact this ram because of your voice? It's only because you're blonde. So to me, that was bittersweet, because it reminded me of my positionality and the fact that I'm having this coerced standpoint to show that, this is the kind of learning I can share with you. It cannot work out. This is not reciprocity. This is superiority. And this is hierarchical authority, just telling. And I loved where she said, min aglik. It's just harsh, that's true. And so in learning, moved from being condescending, preaching, into moments of immediate connectivity that happened as, you know, an outcome of immediacy, of experiential moments. And for you to be able to grow into that, it will take some time. Just you forget about your academic world, your academia, your online courses that you take from Coursera, MOOCs here and there, and just you focus on the moment as it happens. And you allow it to take its place without any coerced intervention that takes away from the authenticity and organic experiences of these women. So it is because of her I learned that when I go there, the dress code is very important. I'm not submitting. When I use the right dress code, that helps me to connect with Bilal, because it's in this space, it's not about my way. It's about the situatedness of the moment's way. And if the dress code would help me to get closer to her and obliterates all the degrees of boundaries coming from my positionality and her positionality, I think as part of Ishra, we need to do that. The idea of just testing and measuring how much you are giving in or giving up for that would never work. It's more about you helping yourself to immerse into an indigenous community that is never your community. And I remember at the very beginning, and this is something I shared earlier in the lecture with the researchers, that at the very beginning, someone academic coming, wanting to create Ishra and learn about herding and farming, and to them, that does not make any sense because it's so disruptive of the kind of normative relationship we have here. And it is defamiliarized to them to see that, correct? So I would say the first months I was framed within different stories, conspiracy stories, that maybe she's there to steal our lands or conquer all the lands, or maybe she's there to change the social fabric of the society, because they don't know how to frame you, where to position you, and how to position you. Through Ishra, after 1 month, I was able to win their trust. And every time I heard about some rumors regarding me and my image, sometimes it could be image destruction, maybe. It never leaves me with this sense of anger. It was an indicator that I'm not doing enough to be part of this believable context or part of this relatable I'm not relatable enough. This is what I said. I'm not relatable enough. It means there is something missing. But with more experience, I was able to get there. And there are many, many stories. One of the stories is of Zahra, for example. Just to give you here an idea about the kind of modality, leadership modality we would have of these women. Zahra lost her husband at the age of 31, left her with 7 sons and daughters. The last one was a son with disability. So when her husband passed away, he left her nothing. Her family is really poor. Her family-in-law is poor as well. and no one was able to fend for the family. And she needed to think about ways to make ends meet. The good thing that she had some sheep and goats, and she managed to make labane jamid and some dairy products, but that was not enough. But anyway, she managed. Immediately after that, she started working on shearing the wool and making rugs. And she is a very famous one in Bani Hamida, by the way. She was one of the first people to start off this. When her son was at the age to go to the university, to go to school, sorry, he was 6 years old. She lived in a bumpy area. You don't have paved roads. So what she did, she had to carry him all the way to his school, around 800 meters, almost 1 kilometer, carrying him. And then she asked the superintendent, she said, can I have my son? Then we didn't have, because that was some time ago, we didn't have the inclusion policy that we have nowadays. And by the way, in the Ministry of Education now, we have the inclusion strategy and policies. Even with the school curricula, they're becoming very sensitive to equity, equality, and as much as curriculum developers can do. So then it was not there, and the school is not ready for students with disability. He said, okay, I accept him under one condition: you have to stay close to the school, so whenever he needs to move from one room into another, you're gonna be around, especially if also he wants to use any facilities. She accepted. So she was there waiting for her son until he's done with his school, and she was always available to help him navigate and move from one place into another inside the school. Next to the school, there is another girls' school. She went to the school and she said, do you have any work that I can work during the school hours while my son is in school? And it is within a walking distance. If they need her in her son's school, she'll be able to make it there. So she managed to get a job opportunity as a janitor. In the school, the dropout ratio was very high. And part of it because girls were not very happy with the cleanliness of the school, and they avoided going there, especially when it comes to restrooms. When she started to be there as a janitor, she made it a point. She said, I think, because this is what she did, she wanted all her sons and daughters to pursue their university studies. So she said, I want everybody as well, even in this school. She started her work in this school, and she made it a point that she receives the girls with flowers. If we don't have flowers, it was like some green branches here and there. And then she made sure that the school is very clean. And she received them with such a beautiful smile. Little things, some people would say that these are little things that someone can come up with, that she turned the recession from the girls' school into new opportunities of enrollment. The ratio of the dropout girl students in the school, which was, on the rise always, the drop, decreased tremendously. And in 1.5 years, they said attendance was 100%. Some people would just, if you look at this story and the impact she had with those small, it's an indirect impact where she created an inviting environment for these girls to come and learn in a safe and in a safe space, aesthetically high, aesthetically or aesthetically viable space. Also, she raised the bar for university education because she was able to bring up sons and daughters who are so passionate about learning, because in a way she was able to give them the right feeling about learning. You learn because this is your road for self-actualization. You learn because this is your road for being able to create productivity and success. Every time someone wanted to drop out from school, the father and the mother would say, look at Zahra's sons and daughters and what they are doing and achieving in the absence of the father, and allow them to be your role models. Because of her, this village has the highest ratio of university degrees, but not a university degree. Those are people who are turning the degrees into productive projects. Her son with disability, he got his MA in law. If you look at this modality, this is why I said my theory is not a feminist theory. Because if they look at it, the first thing they would say, you are with your stories, you are trying to perpetuate stereotypes about women, that they have to be maternal, they have to sacrifice themselves, they have to be altruistic. This is why I'm saying here, clear and loud, I'm not using feminism. Feminism could be functional somewhere, but not here. This is Nisswiyya of Nisa al-Ard, Barefoot Nisswiyya, because they are the ones who are practicing Ishra on a daily basis to empower herself, her family members, and the whole community. And for her, this is not problematic at all. It does not hijack her potentiality. It does not hijack her story. It does not hijack her efforts and time. But in fact, it turns the time and the effort in whatever you do of Nisswiyya al-Ard, of Barefoot Nisswiyya, is something that creates more solidarity in the society, more economic solidarity, togetherness, care, and collaborative economies, collaborative efforts is in fact celebrated in these areas. Unfortunately, some of these Nisa al-Ard, Barefoot Nisswiyya, when they were taken away from their communities and asked them to immerse into the NGOization, they turned from Ishra and collaborative solidarity and work together and empowerment into being highly competitive. And this is where more fragmentation was created. So in Ishra, in Barefoot Nisswiyya, what we are trying to build is a landscape of Nisswiyya thought that does not fragment society, does not build division, does not capitalize pathological binarism of this victim-villain, even if it exists because of the kind of power dynamics you have, or power relation hierarchies, apparatuses that you have in a community or in a society. The Ishra would allow the concept of whatever achievement, productivity and success I have, it doesn't have to be always set or positioned in a rivalry matter. It can be put within a continuum of successes of all, little successes of all. In my classroom, I always struggle with exams because I feel with exams and grades, we create more of this competitiveness in the classroom. Something that helped me with that is I have Tara. Tara used to be an ex-student. So what you do, where you have students who are very competent, just turn this competency and the skills you have into tools and resources to empower others. And she used to do that. And by empowering others, this is where you feel that your achievement is not measured by your A status or being the first and the top in the class, but it is measured on how much you are empowering others, especially students with this conceptual gap or linguistic language gap. They need a lot of help and support inside the classroom. So this is the Ishra we have here as a research methodology. It can be practiced everywhere inside our houses. This is why I'm creating a case study out of it. It can be even in political terrains. We need more of Ishra people in the political landscape to get better relationship at the world level, at the global level. With the globalization, in the absence of Ishra or ethics of care, this is turned into a highly politically turbulent and chaotic world with this discrepancy of rights, of equalities. So if with the Ishra, if we turn it into a method inside the classroom, a method inside our houses, in the neighborhood, political terrain, in different communities, I think this is where we can get the best out of our humanity, and we can capitalize on that. And thank you very much.